Welcome to another edition of Crime News with Mark Solomon. It's October 14, 2021, and today we're going to be doing an update on Summer Wells. A couple quick things have happened. We're going to talk about that. We're going to go on to a Texas man who was sentenced to death in a case where the judge is biased anti-Semitic. We're going to talk about that. Next, we're going to talk about the Gabby Petito autopsy results, what it means to her case, her family, and the criminal justice system as a whole. Stay tuned. Summer Wells has been missing since June 15, and there have been no real updates. I couldn't find anything from law enforcement, but one thing I did find was an article back from September 23 where the police were not really able to give much of an update. Summer Wells' mother, Candace Bly, still believes that Summer was abducted. Even though it has been 3 months since Summer Wells first went missing, back on September 23, 2021, in a release by Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, the bottom line is that they have not given up and won't. The September update goes on to assert that they want the public to know that the case is not cold, that they're not giving up. They still have a TBI tip line, and that's what the tip line is. If you would like to contribute, please call them and let them know what you have if you have anything useful. And in other news on Summer Wells, the reward that was created back in June, which has been accumulating, is set to expire 6 months after that creation date. That reward fund, says the father, he does not want the reward to expire. So what'll happen at the end of 6 months? The entire reward will not go to a human being. It'll be donated to a children's advocacy fund. Mr. Wells is set to appear on Dr. Phil, where he is, I believe, going to ask the public to make sure that that is not going to happen. He thinks it's a conflict of interest. Both Candace and Donald Wells have spoken with Dr. Phil, but an air date has not yet been set. Now, on that reward fund, he thinks it's a conflict of interest if that money does not go towards Summer Wells rescue or tip line or whatever that goes to benefit his daughter. He thinks it's a conflict of interest if it gets donated to a children's advocacy fund. What do you think? I'd love to know your thoughts. Tell me the whats and the whys and how comes in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments on that. So let's move on to a case out of Texas. Randy Halprin, a Jewish man who was sentenced to death for murder, had his case heard by an appeals court who found that the judge in his case was anti-Semitic, simply did not like him because the defendant was Jewish. And now he gets to have his case reheard. Interesting, because we've talked quite a bit about jurors, we've talked a lot about witness bias, but we have not talked so much about judicial bias. And here is a perfect case. Randy Halprin struggled with his Jewish identity. He stood trial on capital murder in Dallas before Judge Vic Cunningham in 2003. On Monday, Judge Mays found that that Judge Cunningham's unmistakable bias against Jewish people was too much to ignore. And when that type of bias happens in a judicial setting, it makes perfect sense that this defendant was not given a fair shot at justice. What do you think? I'd love to know your thoughts. Put them in the comments below. I'd love to hear why you think what you think as well. Last thing I wanted to talk about was Gabby Petito, and this is going to be the rest of today's video. As everybody knows, the autopsy results came out just yesterday, and heartbreaking story, but let's talk just a touch about the background to bring everybody up to date. August 12, police responded to an alleged domestic violence incident between Brian Laundrie and Gabby Petito. September 15, Gabby Petito's mother describes that she knew something was wrong. September 19, the police resumed the search for Brian Laundrie. September 20, FBI execute a search warrant at the home of Gabby Petito's fiancé a day after a body was found. September 21, Gabby Petito's boyfriend was sought in a Florida nature preserve, and he's still being sought. September 23, Gabby Petito is ruled a homicide victim by the medical examiners, but key autopsy details are unclear. September 28, the family remains confident in the FBI. And finally, on October 11, the manhunt still going on a month later. That brings us up to date. Brian Laundrie is still at large. People have speculated that he's still in Florida, that he's a great outdoorsman, that he's a terrible outdoorsman. Other people say they've seen him in North Carolina. I have had viewers comment that he's probably up in New York, where his family moved from about 2-3 years before they moved to Florida, about 2-3 years ago. And the other speculation, now that Dog the Bounty Hunter is on the case, he has said that he just wants to find Laundrie, go home and enjoy his honeymoon. But let's talk about the autopsy results. As you probably already know, a coroner has ruled her death was by strangulation. That makes this case a homicide. This is Trenton County Coroner Dr. Brent Blue, who had previously ruled that his death had been a homicide, and even though the cause was revealed, he declined to provide details about Petito's autopsy or a potential suspect, saying that he was limited in what information that he could release. One of the things I really wanted to talk about, I've heard so many people, family, friends, just people I talk to about the subject. A lot of people have been talking about the missing white woman syndrome. And be it Summer Wells or Gabby Petito, there are a lot of people who are not white, especially not blonde, white, female missing people. And they never get as much attention as the people who we've been covering here. And I just want to say, I don't like that. I don't like that so many people are missing and are not getting so much attention. And you tell me, the last time there was a manhunt for a killer for somebody in like the Gabby Petito case, tell me a name of somebody other than Brian Laundrie who the FBI was looking for in a murder of a single person ever. I can't think of one. Let me know if I'm wrong. Tell me in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you have to say on that. But back to the story at hand, the legal document that the medical examiner filed on October 5th with the Teton County Court of District Court specified that the cause of death was manual strangulation or throttling. We believe this was being done by a human being, he told CNN's Anderson Cooper. So let's talk a little bit about strangulation. I've been doing criminal defense for a lot of years, and one of the things I can tell you is I can't think of a time that I have not had a defendant charged with some sort of domestic violence strangulation. And if you look at that timeline, remember, anytime we look at strangulation or domestic violence in general, there's almost always an escalation when there's multiple cases. You almost never see somebody just do the same thing over and over. And this goes back to the concept of power and control. It used to be called the cycle of violence, or the wheel, the power and control wheel, where a person commits an act of domestic violence. The next thing they do is they apologize for it, and then they ask for forgiveness, and then they do it again. So in other words, you end up with a situation where every time this thing happens, they essentially get a pass to do it again, but now they can go even farther. And that's why here in Colorado, there's a law that requires any allegation, a credible allegation, to be arrested and taken out of the home. That way, the person cannot retaliate against the accuser as soon as the police officers leave. The police officers are going to leave with a suspect/defendant every single time they have probable cause to arrest somebody for domestic violence. And strangulation is one of those things that is the almost peak of domestic violence. And I say that because they say a strangulation has the highest risk for causing death on the next case. And that's why here in Colorado, we use a pretrial risk assessment for people who are accused of domestic violence. Denver's great about this. They call it an ODARA score. And those ODARA factors are things that go back into a person's past, as in, does the person control money? Does the person exhibit great amounts of jealousy? Do they control your whereabouts? Has there ever been a situation of strangulation? Was this a case of strangulation? And anytime there's a strangulation allegation, it sends that ODARA score through the roof. It makes person the highest risk they possibly can be, because the next step after strangulation is often a domestic violence homicide. I've been telling my clients for years, every single misdemeanor crime of domestic violence is a prelude to something getting bigger, which means that any time you see a domestic violence homicide, you will almost always see some other allegation, which is often a misdemeanor. So in other words, prosecutor or a judge is going to look at a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence as a possible future homicide. And that's what they're trying to prevent with protection orders and no contact orders and domestic violence classes and monitored probation. They're trying to save people's lives. And so if we apply this phenomenon to the Gabby Petito case, there was an allegation where a witness saw a man striking a young woman, and the police responded. They didn't see anything. Nobody admitted to anything. She was crying, but nobody actually said something about an actual assault. So they didn't probably have probable cause to arrest anybody. But at the same time, if it had happened, that would have been a prelude to a strangulation. And in this case, it escalated very quickly, and it went from a domestic violence allegation of misdemeanor assault up to a strangulation homicide. Just like that. We're talking about in a short span of days. And that's not unreasonable, especially when two people have been traveling with each other, when they both have histories of mental health disorder, potentially, and tempers were high. Plus, they were putting on a facade of being a perfect couple for Instagram. And with all of that stress, it doesn't surprise me that this type of thing could happen. It's horrible. It's horrible. It's heartbreaking. And I wished that the officers had been able to investigate more. I'm not saying they did anything wrong. I'm saying I wish they'd been able to investigate more so that they could have possibly prevented what came next, if Brian Laundrie did, in fact, commit this murder. Here we have an article which talks a little bit about what I was talking about just now, and that Gabby Petito's cause of death is a lesser-known sign of intimate partner violence. Now, I have to take issue with this article because I think anybody in the criminal justice system knows that it's not lesser known. And what I was talking about as far as the escalation is an extraordinarily well-known phenomena when it comes to domestic violence in general. Kelly Lynch, who's an associate professor at the University of Texas in San Antonio, who told Good Morning America, strangulation is not talked about as much, but it is a major risk factor for intimate partner homicide, and we see it occur alongside more severe abuse. And again, here in Colorado, we look at it as one of the major signs of possible future homicides. The expert goes on to say, when you're talking about strangulation, it's very typically the cause of death in domestic violence cases, said Dan Abrams, an ABC chief legal analyst. He said in an interview Wednesday on GMA, it's angry, it is violent, it takes time, and that's precisely what many believe have happened here. And remember, domestic violence is about power and control. And what more power do you have over somebody when you're controlling whether or not they can breathe or whether or not their brain gets oxygen from their heart? The last thing that we wanted to update you on is that finally we have a situation where Gabby Petito's parents are traveling to Wyoming to collect her remains. After the medical examiner, Blue, had determined on October 5 that Ms. Petito died of strangulation, waited until Tuesday to release the results. Petito's body was released to the Valley Mortuary in Jackson for cremation, Blue said on Wednesday. And that's what we've got for you today. If you've got anything you'd like to contribute on the issues of either Summer Wells, the Texas man who's going to get a new trial in his capital murder case, or Ms. Gabby Petito, I would love to hear it in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to subscribe, go ahead and hit that subscribe button with the little bell to be notified of future videos. And until then, thank you so much for watching.